The sound came from the door soft at first, like wind worrying at the wood. Then it turned deliberate, a steady scratch, a low rumble that didn't threaten so much as plead. Outside, a blizzard had swallowed the night. Snow flew sideways. The cold had dropped well past 20 below. I opened the door a crack and my breath stopped. A lynx stood on my threshold. Its coat was thick and gray-brown, crusted with ice. Steam spilled from its mouth with every exhale, and clamped gently in its jaws, as if it weighed nothing at all, hung a tiny lynx cub limp, silent. Fear hit me before reason could. I slammed the door and stumbled back, heart hammering. A lynx isn't a barn cat. It's a wild predator, strong, unpredictable. And in all my years living alone out here, I'd never seen anything like this. A wild animal coming to a human cabin by choice. But the scratching didn't stop. It came again, urgent now, stubborn and desperate, nothing like the warning scrape of aggression. It sounded like a decision, I have nowhere else to go. Slowly, I opened the door wider. The lynx was still there, unmoving in the storm, as if it had been carved from it. Its yellow eyes locked on mine. There was no fury in them, only exhaustion and something that looked dangerously close to hope. I stepped aside, without hesitation. It crossed my threshold. Cold air and the sharp scent of pine swept into the cabin, with it followed by something metallic and wrong. Blood. The lynx padded straight to the fireplace, lowered the cub onto the rug with astonishing care, and turned its gaze back to me. Waiting? For a moment, I couldn't move. I told myself it had come for warmth, for shelter. That was simple enough to believe. I brought out a bowl of water and set it down at a safe distance. The lynx approached cautiously, drank greedily, and never once stopped watching me. I fetched meat from the refrigerator, cut it into pieces, and placed it on a plate. It ate not like an animal half mad with hunger, but slowly, methodically, as if every bite cost it something. When it finished, it moved immediately back to the cub. I crouched beside the little one. It couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 weeks old. Its eyes were barely open. Its body was so still that my chest tightened. I touched it. The cub was ice cold. I grabbed an old blanket, wrapped the cub, and slid it closer to the fire. At once the lynx lay down beside it and began to lick its fur, quick and thorough, trying to coax warmth back into that tiny body. I tossed more logs into the fire, and that's when I saw it, a dark smear on the floorboards. Blood. My gaze snapped to the lynx's front leg. One paw lay at the wrong angle, fur matted, stained. I took a step closer. A low growl rolled out of the animal, warning, but not rage. "It's okay," I murmured, more to steady myself than anything else. I lowered to my knees and extended my hand, palm open, letting it choose. The lynx leaned forward and smelled me. The growl faded into silence. I moved carefully, inch by inch, until I could see the wound clearly. It was deep and ragged, torn rather than cut clean. The flesh around it was swollen, angry, and there were marks, parallel gashes that told a story I knew too well. A trap. A steel trap, jaws biting down, teeth of metal. The lynx had ripped itself free, leaving pieces of itself behind. The injury wasn't fresh, at least a day, maybe 2. Infection was already trying to take hold, and suddenly, everything made sense. With a paw like this, it couldn't hunt. Without hunting, it couldn't feed itself. And without milk, its cub would die slowly, quietly, in the snow. So it had come here, to my door. I ran for my first aid kit. Town was 50 kilometers away, and in the forest you learn to keep supplies. I returned with antiseptic, bandages, antibiotic ointment. The lynx watched every movement tense, calculating, but not fleeing. I held the antiseptic out first, and let it sniff. Then I began. When the liquid touched raw flesh, the lynx flinched. A rumble vibrated in its chest, but it didn't snap. It didn't bolt. It endured. A wild animal, choosing pain because something in it understood. This was help. I cleaned the wound as gently as I could, worked ointment into the torn edges, and wrapped the paw tight with gauze and bandage. When I finished, the lynx lifted its head and pressed its rough tongue against my hand, one quick lick, then another. I sat very still, shaken by the weight of that trust. Then I turned to the cub. It was dehydrated and dangerously weak. It needed fluids now. I warmed water, mixed in powdered milk, added a tiny bit of honey, and found an old dropper. The lynx watched me the whole time. When I lifted the cub into my hands, it didn't growl. It only edged closer, ears forward, eyes bright with worry. The cub couldn't suck. Milk dribbled down its muzzle. I remembered something a local vet once told me about failing kittens. Feed drop by drop. Rub the throat gently to trigger swallowing. Be patient. So I did. For hours. The cabin smelled of smoke, and snow melt, and antiseptic. The fire cracked. The storm hissed against the walls. And the lynx lay close enough that its warmth pressed against my knee, its head resting there as if, for one impossible night, I had become part of its world. Around 3 in the morning, the cub's paws began to twitch. Its breathing steadied. When I offered the dropper again, it made a weak attempt to latch. By dawn, it opened its eyes. A thin squeak left its throat, small but alive. The lynx answered immediately, licking it with renewed urgency, curling its body around it like a shield. Relief washed through me so hard I nearly laughed. The cub had made it. For the first time that night, the lynx seemed to let go. Its eyes drifted shut beside the fire. But my mind wouldn't settle. Those trap marks, they shouldn't have been here. Traps had been banned in these woods years ago. If traps were back, it meant one thing: poachers. And if there were poachers, it wasn't only animals at risk. As soon as the blizzard eased, I dressed, grabbed my radio, and took a long stick to probe the snow ahead. The lynx and cub slept by the fireplace when I stepped outside. The tracks were partially buried, but I could still follow them. I moved slowly, tapping the snow in front of each step. About a kilometer out, the trees opened into a small clearing and my stomach dropped. Along the edge were steel traps. 5, maybe more, spaced like a cruel fence. Anger flared hot in my chest. I advanced carefully, probing every meter. My stick punched through a thin crust of snow and struck metal another trap, expertly camouflaged under pine boughs. I jumped back, pulse roaring. I pulled out the radio and called the forest rangers. They answered quickly. I told them everything. The injured lynx, the cub, the line of illegal traps, the danger. The ranger on the other end said they were coming and warned me not to touch anything. I marked the coordinates on my GPS and headed back. When I reached the cabin, the lynx was waiting at the door, as if it had counted the minutes of my absence. The cub miraculously was already crawling, stubbornly alive. An hour later, the rangers arrived, 3 men in uniform, faces pinched with cold and concern. I explained what had happened and showed them the lynx through the window. The senior ranger shook his head and said they'd received reports of injured animals for months, but had never been able to find the source. I led them to the clearing. The moment they saw the traps, their expressions hardened. The senior ranger kneeled, examined one closely, and muttered that it was professional equipment. They searched the area and found more traps and small notches cut into trees, the kind poachers use as orientation marks. It wasn't random, it was a network. Back at my cabin, they asked for clear photographs of the lynx's injury. I carefully unwrapped the bandage, took several sharp pictures from different angles, and wrapped it again. The lynx stayed still for me, as if it understood the role it now played. I sent the photos over the radio. The ranger confirmed the wound matched the traps. For 2 days, the rangers worked the forest. They removed nearly 20 traps along animal trails and discovered a temporary camp with animal pelts. Poachers checked their lines regularly, so the rangers set an ambush. Meanwhile, the lynx and its cub lived with me. I fed the cub again and again until, by the 3rd day, it began to suck on its own. The mother's paw healed steadily. Soon she could put weight on it, without flinching. I watched the cub grow stronger, saw it bat clumsily at its mother's tail, tumble over its own paws, and pounce at shadows on the rug. It trusted the world again, and the lynx wild, where he trusted me enough to let that happen in my presence. On the 4th night, the radio crackled with news. The ambush had worked. 2 poachers had driven in an old pickup, headlights cutting the trees to check the trap line. The rangers arrested them on the spot. Inside the truck were more traps and tools for skinning. The senior ranger came to my cabin himself. When he saw the lynx lying calmly beside the fire while the cub played with a piece of rope, he just shook his head. In 30 years, he said, he'd never seen anything like it. Under questioning, the poachers confessed to dozens of cases. And because a wounded lynx had carried its dying cub to a human door, their operation was finally stopped. 3 weeks passed. The mother's paw healed completely, leaving only a small scar. The cub doubled in size, bright-eyed and restless. And I knew what time it was. Letting them go wasn't easy, but keeping them would have been wrong. I chose a mild, sunny day when the snow began to soften and the air held the first promise of spring. I opened the door wide and stepped back. The lynx stood, glanced at the open doorway, then at me, then at its cub. The little one hovered at the threshold, sniffing the cold, clean air like it was tasting freedom. The mother approached me slowly. I dropped to my knees. She came close enough that I could see the frost caught in her whiskers. Then, gently, she pressed her nose to my hand, cool and damp, astonishingly soft. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like a message. Thank you. Goodbye. I remember. Then she turned, nudged her cub with a muzzle, and they stepped out onto the porch. The cub paused and, clumsy with imitation, pushed its small nose into my palm. It hit me so hard I couldn't breathe for a moment. They trotted down into the trees. At the edge of the forest, the lynx looked back once, just once, and then both of them vanished into the white. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at their tracks in the melting snow. Part of me wanted to call them back, but the forest was where they belonged. Half a year later, in mid-autumn, I was walking a familiar trail when movement caught my eye. 50 meters away, in a small clearing, 2 lynxes stood side by side. An adult, with the distinctive ear tufts, and a younger one larger now, stronger. They drank from a stream. The adult lifted its head, sensed me, and looked straight at me. We held each other's gaze for several long seconds, and I could have sworn I recognized those eyes. Something in them carried the shape of that stormy night. The younger lynx looked up too. It was no longer a fragile bundle in a blanket. It was a young hunter. I didn't move. I just stood there, warmth filling my chest. After a moment, the adult lynx turned without a sound and slipped into the brush. The young one followed. I stayed on the trail, smiling through the sting of tears. They were alive, healthy, together. The cub I had fed drop by drop on that winter night had become a strong, young, wild animal. I walked back toward my cabin slowly. That freezing night, the scratching at the door, the yellow eyes full of desperation and hope had changed something in me. A mother's love has no borders. Not of species, not of instinct. The lynx overcame its fear of humans to save her cub, and it taught me the strongest lesson about trust I've ever learned. Since that day, I've thought a lot about how thin the line is between fear and kindness, how one small decision can mean the difference between life and silence in the snow. Wild animals don't come to our doors for no reason. When they do, it's because the world has already pushed them to the edge. If this story moved you, let it become something more than a moment.
Choose empathy. When you can leave fresh water out during harsh seasons, drive slower on forest roads, keep your distance, but never your indifference. Support rangers and rescue groups.
Report traps, illegal hunting, and cruelty. Teach children that wild doesn't mean unworthy, and that every creature has a place in this world beyond what it can give us. Because love, it turns out, isn't only something humans are capable of. Sometimes it arrives on 4 silent paws carrying a fragile life asking for a chance. So be that chance. When you can, protect them, speak for them, and help keep the forest safe for every heartbeat that belongs there.